welcome back. So second panel, we have Marius Horning, Head of Production here at our host venue, Port. Paul Handley, Production and Technical Director at the National. Helen Tully, Front of House Manager and Environmental Champion, which is the title I'm just loving, from Theatre Royal Norwich. And David Evans, who's here representing SIPA, Sustainability in Production Alliance.
And National Theatre Wales.
And National Theatre. I almost said natural theatre.
It's very natural.
So I thought maybe we could just kick off this panel by having each of you talk for just a couple of minutes about how you're working at your venue and the things that relate to sustainability in production, and then I'd like to come back to Sarah's comment about working with other stakeholders in our teams. Who would like to kick off?
Kick off. Yeah, it'd be great. What? Sorry?
The host.
The host, yeah. So I guess also why we're having this here this week is because we announced our reaction to the current climate crisis, and that we were going to strive to achieve carbon neutrality as fast as possible. We got all the artists on board, everyone we were going to work with in the season, and the next who we knew, to sign up to, or to agree to be part of this, and they're all excited. And yeah, so it's been very interesting, and we've had lots of the whole theatre. A bit of your questions, like every department in the whole theatre would join together in big town hall meetings. We divided up into working groups on various subjects, and they would go away and do research, and there would be sharings and things like that. So there's a lot going on. The immediate thing was for us to then immediately start trying to do green, much greener and theatre productions. The challenge of that has been, of course, that we're doing it within the same format, because the season had been announced when we put this in. So it's very hard, but we're learning a lot. So there's lots of things that are probably more ad hoc in discussion. I can come in with experiences we've had. But yeah, so that's our starting point. And one thing I've said as well is, as a production manager, I've, through my entire career, been made to get a shorthand on doing things quickly and for the budget, and to look like that thing, you know, as close as possible, and trying to find, at the end result would always be, you know, to try to get it as close to what, well, to get what the designer wants, but to have maybe options that would make it affordable, or changes in texture and things that would make it affordable. So that's what I've been doing most of my career. And now, suddenly, it's trying to then look at how we're going to do this and think about how much carbon will this design do. So the starting point of that, doing that within the old, very immediately, I mean, we knew it before we even started, that how we make theatre has to change. And that's what we're learning very quickly in terms of the first meeting with the designer and a contractor would take 3-4 times much as long, as it would before, because every single element we're going through and asking how we're going to build it, and is there a different way of building it, and for the designer it's a new experience. The contractor, luckily, the first show we're doing, this was very up for it. And yeah, and we learned that we're not going to be able to change everything now, or like, that's it, we've said we're going to do it, so this next show is going to be 100%, you know, sorted. There's lots of things we're learning, and you know, one thing, for instance, is, you know, I believe that the designers need to be employed for a longer period than leading into these shows. The whole timeline needs to change. There needs to be more of a shorthand with the contractors. The way we bring contractors into projects, you know, if we keep having lots of bidding rounds through to white card to find out who's going to do it, and it needs to be like an early commitment. I'm feeling very strongly now with the builder that the designer can work with. Things like that. It's, you know, it's quite obvious stuff, but when you're trying it in reality, it becomes much clearer. Yeah, I think there's lots of examples of things that work and don't work, and the aesthetic is a big decision around it, which I think is which everyone is aware of. I mean, you look at me, look at this shameful theatre floor I've got here. Why didn't I spend 5 minutes giving it a lick of black paint. You know, it might sound like a cop-out, but that was a decision we made. It's like, what's the point? We're going to put another show in here. It's going to sit for a week. Are we going to spend some paint? You know. So yeah, it's not very nice to look at, but it doesn't really matter. Yeah, no, I think I'm up for like being stimulated to have some more remember some points as we talk and share about it. But that's essentially what we're doing at the moment, and looking at time, looking at how we can change our schedules and how we, you know, you might not necessarily need to change the budget. One argument is like, well, now I need, if all my costumes are going to be ethically as well as sustainable, so have, you know, I can't go to Primark, all these kinds of things. Am I going to increase budgets? And so I think it's like this, I don't think necessarily we need to, but we need to spend money as well getting people engaged longer. And I know everyone's busy, we have this idea of here's the design, figure out how much it's going to cost and call me and we'll see what we need to change, and then to add into that, and you know, the time we spend together already making shows with designers can be quite brief moments, because everyone's very busy and everyone's doing lots of other shows. So it's giving ourselves longer production periods as well. We're looking at that. So it's informing how we're planning the next season, and we're finding out, you know, by jumping straight in, we're finding out lots of things about that. And I think even like, if you are going to have a chance, like the first show, I had to go instinctively on things, you know, like minimizing the amount of steel we need is the way, because we won't be able to accurately put like X amount of kilograms of carbon on this show until we know exactly how we're going to build it, and it's been drawn up and somebody can do all that math. So you have to, starting point has to be quite instinctual, and I think all of us have instincts of what's good and bad, and we can come along with that. Like, so simply asking things like, is everything on this show, can it be reused, recycled, or is it degradable? You know, like one thing I feel strange about is that I wash my yogurt pots at home. I might have told this before, it's a boring anecdote, but you know, you at home you wash your yogurt pots and you put them in recycling, and you're good about all that, and then I might do a show which is a huge pile of polycarbonate sheets and other compound plastic materials that can't be recycled. It's on stage for 3 weeks. People come and see it and think it's great, but then that's going to be there forever. And I can wash yogurt pots for the rest of my life, and I will never ever produce as much waste as I did in that one show. So those are the sort of things that, you know, inspire us to like really look at. You know, people have been looking at sustainability in theatre for years, and everyone's been trying different things over the years. And for me, and with the whole building, and I said with the whole building being part of it, the environment is there, but the discussion can be quite difficult. I think that's enough for now for me.
So the National also declared a climate emergency, I think last November. I'm very conscious we've been scratching around in this subject for about the last 12 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And because, you know, the arts are populated with well-meaning liberal types, we all care, but actually I don't feel that we've really got to grips with perhaps what needs to happen, because we've not wanted to mess with the basic model on with which we make work. And I think we're slowly getting to a point, or hopefully accelerating to a point, where we realise we probably have to turn the whole thing upside down a bit. To your point, Paul, you know, I think we really do, and to yours, Marius, it is about the aesthetic. If we carry on with a model of presenting designs 1 to 25 models, and then working out how to do it, all we'll ever do is scratch away at the issue of trying to reduce carbon. We'll get there, and I think our scratching has produced some results. There are some good initiatives. I think we are all more conscientious about the materials we use. But in the end, our sort of fixation on bespoke designs 3D representations of ideas, leaves us in the end with very limited choices. And inevitably we will always be a wasteful industry if we carry on that way. So I think we have to turn that thing upside down. And I know that there are little pockets of artists having that discussion and understanding the fact that this burden is shared by all of us. I don't think anyone is absolved, and I think for quite a long while we sort of pushed it around, looked at, it's the designer's problem, they're telling us what to do, or it's the production manager's problem because I don't care what you make my set out of, make it out of the greenest thing you can, mushrooms, but it needs to look like that. And actually we need to share it. It needs to be properly collaborative. I think certainly for the last few years, what we've been trying to do at the National is just make sure we get it into the conversation, make sure that environmental impact is considered as seriously as budget and the resource that's available, whether it's time. And the other good analogy is health and safety. That kind of didn't hit this industry properly until the 2000s, and there's lots of people still working. The majority of their experience was before the year 2000, and they're still a little bit like, what do you mean I can't climb up that thing without a harness? But we have shifted the industry, and it's taken time, and I think we can do the same with environmental impacts. We send out a memorandum to all acting companies, show companies, so designers, directors, everything at the beginning of every rehearsals. We put our concern with environmental impact into designer and director contracts. And we do talk about it. We talk about it at model meetings, and then we assess it in feasibility meetings that we have as a building once designs have come in. Does it take us anywhere hugely productive? Have we rejected anything because of its carbon impact? Not yet. We're starting to measure stuff more accurately this year. It's sort of shameful that it's taken us this long, but it has. We're trying to generate a bespoke carbon calculator that fits into our very idiosyncratic systems at the National and isn't a huge admin burden, because I think that's what's put a lot of people off before with carbon calculators. It's like, I've got enough to do without, measuring all this stuff and tracing it all back. But we think we're very close to a thing that should make that all easily sit alongside what we're doing every day anyway. And I'm going to be bold enough and say that we'll look at that data at the end of this year with a view to carbon capping, having carbon budgets on shows next year, next financial year, 21-22. How we set them will sort of depend on the data we collect this year, and of course it will have to relate to the size of the venue and the scale of the production that we're intending. Again, it's just about feeding the conversation, trying to get ideas out there. We've had environmental impact as a fixed agenda item on production meetings for a number of years now, and sometimes it produces nothing apart from slightly guilty look and people looking at the floor. Sometimes it's produced some really good ideas, but again, it's just sort of getting it into the everyday language and discussion around the making of shows. We do recycle an awful lot of stuff. We reuse a lot of floors. We obviously reuse a lot of stage engineering that we create, but I don't want to spin that into anything that's remarkable, because I think as an industry we've always done a certain amount of that. And costume and props, who hasn't reused costume and props since the dawn of time? Anyway, in short, we're up for being more radical, and I'm particularly excited by the conversation that a lot of the senior artists that work with us at the National are having now, where they're really trying to work out what it is they might have to give up in the process. I say give up, but I also think a really important thing is that you start to imagine the future positively, that this isn't just about scaling back and reduction. This is just about steering our immense creativity and ingenuity in a different direction. And out of that, I think we can still achieve spectacle and remarkable pieces of work, just with a different set of values.
Yes. Agreed. So my role at Norwich Theatre Royal is front house manager, as we explained, but for the last 10 years I've also been environmental champion. So Norwich Theatre Royal, if you don't know, is a predominantly a receiving theatre. So if your productions are on tour, we might get your productions come to us. And a lot of our work that we've done so far, and over the last 10 years we've worked with Julie's Bicycle, and we're now five-star venue. So and a lot of that work to get up to that star, those 5 stars, has been front of house and in the front of house area. But for the last 18 months, I've been working with New Adventures and Sadler's Wells to try and open up the conversation with touring productions and what happens when they come to us and what impact they have on us, because there's only so much I can do in the venue to take down the impact that we're having on the environment, you know, the recycling bins and the LED lighting and the heating of the auditorium, for instance, which has had a massive effect on our energy use. But now I want to open up the conversation with production companies and them bringing their productions to us. And I heard in the first panel about it really does come down to your design, I think, and what you're bringing to us and what you're putting on our stage. And it needs to start there. It needs to start at that point. For us, I suppose, as a receiving venue, it needs to start at the contract area, and whether we put a green clause into our contract. We've talked about green riders, and just our expectations of your visit to us. Your visit to us, you putting your production on stage, but going beyond that as well, looking at the company, the cast, the crew that travel as well, what communicating and engaging with them when they come to us as a venue and getting them on board with all our green initiatives, making sure that everyone using our building, not only the people that are based there, but people that are visiting, are doing what needs to be done to help the environment in our area. We've done, like I said, the air handling system in the auditorium is probably our biggest triumph. So we now do a daily timing of the system. So it only comes on, I think it's an hour before the show. It clicks off at the end of the show. So it's only heating or cooling that area for that specific time. So the whole calendar is done for every day of the week, every month. We have saved 75% of our energy use over the last 10 years. So we're now only using a quarter of what we used to 10 years ago. And I do believe that's a big part of it, is managing things like that, switching to LED lights, front of house, backstage, sensor lighting where we can. So I feel that we've done quite a lot as a venue, as a building, but I really want to open up this conversation with touring productions and touring companies and what we can do with you and how we can go further now to get those figures down even further.
I was just talking about SIPA initially. Are you aware of SIPA, Sustainability in Production Alliance? And I mean, National Theatre Wales, we kind of model our activities partly on this. And SIPA identified 9 goals, which obviously the environment was a significant part of it. But also, the first goal was equality. That as an industry, we need to strive for equality. It's ridiculous to be talking about this when we're not equal. Well-being is an important part, and there's a number of organisations that are working on that. And that is a target that we should have, and I think this is all part of the same conversation. And then cultural learning, which is about sharing it, which is precisely what we're doing here. This, in a way, this kind of feels like a SIPA success that we're having these conversations now, because we've been striving for a long time to do this. Try and aspire towards zero loss. I mean, it is, you know, these targets came out 5 years ago, and that feels like a sort of a more attainable thing. You know, there's now, you know, people are using electric delivery systems, etc., etc., and that, you know, is aspirational, but it's something we should aim for, and responsible resourcing. You know, we still live in a world where the idea of getting something cheap is a good idea. It's not fair. You know, we are in a position to buy things. We should be buying them in the most responsible way. Your reference not using Primark, for example. You know, find the right place to get stuff from, and you spend our money appropriately. In National Theatre Wales, because we're state funded, we try and spend the money in Wales first. If we're doing a show in North Wales, we try and spend it in North Wales, and then get wider, and then only keep going further out once it can't be supplied locally, because that's where the money comes from initially. Running on renewables, obviously, and then reporting on shows from the basis of, yes, there's the aesthetics element, the cultural success, but, you know, how have we treated people? What is the environmental cost of the show? And then, obviously, the economic element. These are, you know, we should be looking at the work we're making in a broader way. You know, a show can be very successful if your ecological decisions have been rigorously applied and that you deem them appropriate, not to just how successful the show from an aesthetic point of view. Saying that, you know, the show needs it is no longer, I think, an answer for, you know, using polystyrene or using paints that are damaging to the environment. You know, there must be another way around it. Fair reward, just paying people properly, and a value economy. These are the standards that SIPRA have been sort of pushing, and I think a number of people have adopted and feel comfortable with. And National Theatre Wales, because we don't have the restriction of working within a building all the time, which I think can make life rather more difficult, means that we have the opportunity to recycle, repurpose stuff much more easily than shows that have the requirements of flying that we don't usually have. Yeah, we've had bits of flooring which have been used on 6 or 7 different shows. The show we've got at the moment, the only things which are new are the costumes. Everything else has been repurposed from other shows or is hired. We've kind of come to the terms of the fact that the hire companies are where the industry stores its equipment. You know, they make equipment last for so much longer than if you use it yourself. You know, we don't buy stuff anymore. We just use, you know, we have relationships with various hire companies which are developed over a period of time. It's collaborative. And so we are looking to support the hire industry, which helps us all out. We also always have a statement in the programme about what decisions we've made on a show. And my email address is there so that people can come back to me and say they like the decision or they don't like the decision, or we can have a dialogue. And to be fair, nobody's ever replied. But it's still out there. And you know, we have said, no, you can't use things to designers in the past, and they've understood, and it's part of a trusting relationship. We don't use polystyrene. We don't use a number of items. We did a show which we collaborated here at the Royal Court, and there was a 4-metre tall rock, and so the obvious, you know, the normal way to make it is to carve polystyrene. And we worked with Ridiculous Solutions, who make a lot of the sets here, and we eventually made it out of cardboard. And they went round Ilfracombe, which is where they're based. It's not very near Cardiff. And they recovered boxes from various companies. And so we interrupted the recycling process of those boxes to make this rock. And that was a great success. And that whole set was a process of Ridiculous Solutions and the production manager, who wasn't me, and the designer working together. So we had the model, but instead of kind of exactly duplicating that, they gathered together lots of wood and stuff from the local environment, and then they composed the set together. So it had the spirit of the design. It wasn't an exact copy of the model, but it was the spirit of it. And that I count a massive success. And, you know, artistically we're very happy with it, but it was a different approach, and it worked terribly well. And, you know, the great thing, of course, is that you have that, but we have failures. We had some snow on the show, which we were very pleased about, our paper snow, which made all the actors cough. So then we had to eventually, after lots of research, we reverted to some plastic snow. We had no choice. So that was there was a failure, but we learned a lot from that, as well as from the successes. And I think this is part of the thing, is the conversations about successes and failures and that kind of openness. That's where we're at.
I think it's really interesting what I've heard all 4 of you say is I think about normalizing this, that normalizing it in the way that we've normalized health and safety, taking it across all of the groups, so it's not sort of production finger wagging and going, you can't do this, but having buy-in from the entire building. And I think that then needs to start at sort of the highest level in the organisation. And I wonder if any of you have thoughts about how we take that upwards, rather than sort of us going down as production managers, and I don't mean that in a hierarchical way, the way that sounded, but, you know, saying, well, you can't do this and you can't do that because and actually having a building-wide policy that where if you work with us, these are the things, and you're going through that right now.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the sort of, once the decision was made, the call out to all the designers, all the creators, directors, the lighting design, the sound design, everyone was going to be involved in making the show. This is what we're doing. And we can, as you said, in contracts as well, this is an element that we need to work on. And I think what was interesting when we, right from the start, when we had what our parameters meetings we call concept meetings, which was the first point when I and the artistic director and the executive producer meet with the creative team. Normally at that point it would be the director and the designer, just to find out what they're thinking about the show. As part of that discussion, it's also we talk about that. And the first time we did it specifically saying, you know, this is what we're going ahead. It was like yes, we're really up for it, and like sort of just, you know, can you give us what we can do and what we can't do, and it's not that simple, not at this stage, because I think it's, as I was mentioned as well, it can't be the scenario that it ends up with just a production manager saying, no, you can't use that, you can't use this, or go away and think about it again, but don't use any of these elements. It's like, that's not going to work. But yeah, to rewind to your question, yeah, so it's actually, at that point, it's sort of, it is as important in that discussion when you first say, oh, and by the way, this is the production budget, and look, this is the schedule, and all that kind of, you know, this is, you know, do you need a physiotherapist for the show, or do you need a choreographer? It's part of that discussion right at the start. But starting in it, it's like I didn't have my rules, so, but like we just have to. So, and we were trying to get groups together to maybe make some rules, but as you all know, it's really really hard to get a group of people together. We wanted to have people from the construction industry, we wanted to have designers, we wanted to get together and just have some workshops, some really specific sort of meetings about what we could agree to try as certain rules. So without that happening in time, it became just discussions with the designer about like we just have to go at this and look at instinctively ourselves. We have to do we do research, but good things come out of it, because my questions to suppliers and manufacturers are completely different now, because that's when you know, you will always check in because it's a thing. So, you know, I'm being made to be better, and you speak to people and say, well, you're not the first person who's asked about this. No, we don't currently make a material like that is degradable. Yes, everything we have, nothing can really be recycled. To the point that one company saying, yes, good thing you ask, in a couple of months we will be printing on a material made of raffia, so which is completely biodegradable. We haven't got it yet, but it's coming. So like, okay, well, we are learning things as part of that process, but with the designer. And the pinch points are, again, when you get closer and closer to things needing to go in a truck and decisions having to be made, and you still haven't found the solution together, to then, you know what, at this stage we're just going to have to revert to what we've always done, but we've learned some lessons and we know now a different approach for next time. So yeah, but it has to be a collaboration.
I found when I'm talking about it with people that actually, people have been quite positive. You know, there's a positivity where people want to do this, but it's, to your point, it's sort of not knowing how to do it. You know, we know where to go for technical standards. Where do we go to find out what is the best material, and how? And I wonder if there's a way that we can start to explore around where is that repository and how do we all work together.
I think the ABTT is very interested in starting to help us join it all together. I mean, Julie's Bicycle have done a remarkable job as well over the years. But that is the key. I think there has to be a joint approach, because there's some amazing individual efforts going on, like Eco Pledge, but let's just try and pool all that information and.
The ABTT are pulling that information together at the moment, working
Yeah,
with
yeah.
SIPA and various other people.
Yeah.
And if it feels appropriate, the ABTT should be the house, the place to house that, then that
Yeah.
could be arranged.
And I think there are loads of joint initiatives that we could come up with, something we talked about for several decades. One day we'll do it, but is the big aircraft hangar. Start making things in a more modular way, send them off to
There's somebody talking about it over there.
the aircraft hangar. Oh yeah, we've talked about it as well, haven't we? Yeah. But maybe that's a real thing. It's ridiculous how we're all making the same doors and windows endlessly.
There was that lot in Australia, I guess, who had that wonderful business card with the scale on it, where they were listing everybody's assets. And so it was a virtual warehouse. And there was a story they had about somebody who was an Australian opera company who wanted to do a show about a Mexican show, and they were going to make it, and then they suddenly found that, of course, there was this opera company in Mexico that had all the things they wanted, and so they just shipped them over rather than making them all. And it was a really good idea, but it was just a bit too early, and so they folded, and I think they're using the technology in the educational system now.
Yeah.
But I think there's time for that again, because you can store that info. It doesn't kind of matter where the stuff is. It's about as long as you can access it. And the internet gives us that access.
what it is and
Yeah.
what it measures, and people have always put IP as a block to that, intellectual property, but I think we can overcome that. I think the designers are definitely open to that discussion.
That's something that you've brought up. And do you want to?
Yeah, it's something we were talking about. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's another culture. I don't have much to say about it, but beyond that simple thing, statement really that you've said, that it is a part of the culture change has to be around IP and a sense of ownership.
Yeah.
Of those things, particularly if they're relatively generic. Not that any of us would ever admit to saying it. The style.
Do you have comments or questions from online?
Yeah, just one that's come through from Callum. It says, the goal of reducing carbon and environmental impact is a target we can all agree on. Following on from Marius's comments that there is no set of rules, how do we define what is my carbon footprint and what is the carbon footprint of the suppliers? Where is the line to be measured, and how are we measuring it, and where do we set the benchmark? So again, it's sort of following on from that, how are we, building a set of parameters, a framework that we can start measuring things against? I suppose outside an organisation.
It's true, we don't have benchmarks at the moment, do we? Do we, Graciela? I don't think.
For that one, no.
No. I mean, it's quite hard, as we know. All venues are
Yeah.
very different sizes, shapes, and differently resourced. But I think, that would be a great thing to work towards. We probably need to be a little quicker than the amount of time that would take, so we can't just wait for those benchmarks before we do anything.
But on the other side, I've felt that the inability to achieve benchmarks has held me back and various people I've worked with for telling our story. Why don't we forget that and just tell our stories? Go with the narrative, because we can't get numbers, but just keep telling the stories, tell the stories of the successes and of the failures. And then maybe we'll find a way of benchmarking. But at the moment, I'm feeling like it's a barrier to try and get, because we all say, until you have a standard, you can't work out your successes. Well, actually, we know their successes, so let's just talk about them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we could spend the next 5 years or 10 years trying to establish those benchmarks and decent metrics. We just need to get on with it, don't we?
Yeah, we get the, and then we normalise it. And this
All art should be zero emission.
Yeah.
There's a bold statement, but shouldn't it,
Yeah.
really? If we
Yeah.
can't sort it out, who else can?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of, I know I feel some trepidation, because when there isn't a standard, there is a tendency to say, well, we've done this thing really well, and then you hear about sort of the 3 things you haven't done well, and I think it's also about sort of accepting that we're on a journey, and we should be able to celebrate our successes without necessarily being wrapped on the knuckles for the things that didn't work.
No blame culture,
Yeah.
just every story is a learning story,
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Just wondering, Paul, you said we need to move away from a model box and that concrete model box and reproducing that concrete model box. we've heard one story about how collaboration between a production manager and a set designer can work to make something that keeps the essence of the design and is more sustainable. Have you got other ideas about how that works, bearing in mind that it must have taken both of them a lot longer than it would have normally taken them to do it, and were Theatre Wales known?
I mean, it was set in a rundown house. So, I mean, it was an environment which was begging for recycling. No, I mean, I think it was, I mean, that was a three-way. There was the set construction company, Ricky, and the designer and the production manager, and it was a collaboration there. And no, it was about trust. It was de-hierarchicalized.
But Nick, I think there is a very big point there, which Marius has alluded to as well, is the time frame that we operate in within our economy. It's, you know, frankly, most people to make a living have to do freelancers, you know, however many shows a year, how many jobs, same with freelance production managers. And even the bigger theatres, you know, we are squeezed into such tight production technical periods because we need the audiences, because we need the revenue, and it is very squeezed, and really we need more time to consider these things properly. I mean, John over here works in our drawing office, and we're starting a little subgroup that's going to really try and look seriously at modular scenery, again something we've talked about for years. But is there a kit of parts that could be, you know, a real base of any design? I don't know. We've talked about it. We've never quite got there, but we're going to give it one more go, aren't we, John?
We worked on a show, and the idea, the brief of the designer and the production manager was that this is a show that can tour internationally and literally can go with the 2 actors and 1 stage manager in a couple of cases. So it was built around, you know, chairs that you could find locally, roster that you can find locally. You know, most theatres have access to rostra. We've all got masking, we've all got front of house lighting. You know, actually start thinking about what's there first and use that as your system. So, you know, we've all got trucks. Well, we, you know, often have trucks storing huge amounts of rostra. Is that really necessary? Can we find it? Can we find them locally? And to take a different approach. I mean, at one point there was a whole thing in design training to fight the use of the 8x4 because it was, you know. But actually, can we reverse that and go back to the use of the 8x4, and then you're not actually transporting so much around the place, you know, and find different ways. And, you know, unfortunately the show didn't work, but, you know, certainly we could have sent people out with just 3 hand luggage.
Helen, as a receiving venue, like, how would that conversation work around, you know, could you source things locally for an incoming production? How, is that something you talk about at all?
I don't know. It depended it depends what they need. I know we've done it before with florists when they've needed flowers for a production. We've got obviously local florists to provide it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I mean, the question's never been asked. So yes, we would love to get involved in that if it's something that we can do. But what I'm hearing here is a lot to do with time and money, and I feel like an example for us is that Norwich Theatre Royal, 10 years ago when I started doing this, made a commitment, and I think if you can afford to make that commitment, they paid me above my normal role as front of house manager to do 1 day a week purely on environmental work. So 10 years ago, we're not Arts Council funded. We didn't need to do this. We didn't need it to get our funding. We decided to make that commitment, and we decided to get Julie's Bicycle certification for the work we were doing, and they committed their time and their money in me to work 1 day a week on this, and I've learned so much over the last 10 years. I know more about bins and waste, and I never thought I would as a front house manager. I've been to waste sites. I've seen how they separate. I've looked at so many different recycling bins. It's untrue. So if you've got the time, if you've got the money to commit a person within your production teams to be looking at this at least 1 day a week, then I think that a lot of those time issues that you're talking about will resolve themselves. Just an idea. An example of how it's worked for us, and it has taken time. We didn't start at 5 stars. It's taken us time to build up to where we are today, and I hope that it's not as long as 10 years for you guys to get there. But yeah, I think you are going to have to accept that it will take time. Question from the room?
Yeah, I think the other thing to touch on in a few places is that discussion with the wider world with suppliers and manufacturers. And again, something I'm saying, people are now kind of printing on more sustainable materials. I think there was a thing a month or so ago that Lamarck are working on a more environmentally friendly gaffer tape and this sort of thing. And it's, so clearly, like, as we have those discussions within design teams and that, and we try and engage suppliers and manufacturers, that pressure seems to be working. That if, you know, you're the fifth, sixth person to ask that thing, that economic pressure on them to improve, and then, you know, maybe then in terms of standards and finding out things, we know, oh, well, this type of timber isn't FSC approved and is from Britain or has come from somewhere else, and we can get that knowledge and put that pressure onto people. I know there's only very other stories where, you know, you've got that positive feedback from people, where designers or suppliers have listened.
I have, from a front house point of view, it's not going to help you guys, but for instance, I completely agree with you. You need to keep asking the questions. Make it part of your, you know, your dialogue with suppliers. Just make it one of the first questions you ask, because our ice cream suppliers, we've worked with them for years, and they were plastic tubs, for instance, and now we've got paper tubs. They no longer have a plastic spoon even, they've gone now to wooden spoons. So we've gone from the waste stream of that plastic tub to now recyclable paper tubs. And through asking the questions constantly and then wanting to change for our benefit, to keep our custom, that's what they're going to want to do and they're going to have to do in the future. So keep asking the question.
Yeah, we should always be asking for environmental policies from all our suppliers. And actually, I mean, there are some of the bigger set builders, if they've got involved with any of the big, you know, the games at the Olympics or whatever, they had to fulfil a huge amount of environmental criteria to be eligible. So they're well aware that it's a thing.
I think one thing I'm curious about is to what level we will accept the aesthetics to change and things, and the whole idea of, well, the audience need to see something good, and what are the audience perceptions and what are audience used to seeing, and what would it be like if we made a sort of, you know, if they keep coming to the theatre and it's a, you know, the things look the same and in
A black box.
Yeah.
They'll get
that's
tired
for
of
lots of
it.
years, the black box.
But I think it's communication. That comes down to communication, because I think a lot of our audiences are part of this change and want to see this change. And I think as long as we're communicating in programmes, front of house, in signage, in the marketing material that you use for the productions, if you're communicating this message, I think it's going to sell it even more, to be honest.
Sorry to cut you off. Just something that we wanted to throw in there as well, because actually one of the reasons that we brought this forum together is from our AGM. There was a big discussion about merchandise. A lot of regional theatres obviously still have a panto every year. Merchandise is a massive part of that, and you know, a lot of that remit does. Normally, the environmental thing falls under production technical managers' responsibilities, but obviously that crosses over massively with the front of house. And how a lot of different theatres are trying to come up with new, interesting initiatives to combat, you know, shipping everything in from China and all the plastic and all the rest of it. I just wondered if you had any experience of that or anything that you could share.
Absolutely. So my the Green team are currently in an argument with, I suppose, commercial side of the organisation. We're both fighting, and I'm really stuck in the middle because I have budgets to hit front of house. I have to sell this merchandise. I have to buy in this merchandise. So I'm really stuck in the middle of these two opposing sides, and I see it from both sides. I see that as a charity, as a venue that relies on our income from customers, that we need this money. But I also see that obviously it's plastic tat from China, which is just hideous. So what we've done over the last 5-6 years is try to bring in other products. So plush is a massive item that's really popular. So teddies, soft toys, puppets, hand puppets, finger puppets, things that children can keep and use and love again and again and again. And that's probably been our biggest shift, is going over to communicating with because the pantomime is actually the one production that we do produce in-house every year. And so it's talking with the team, the creative team, trying to get as much information out of them as possible about main characters and the performance, hopefully an animal. We've got Dick Whittington this year, so brilliant. A cat, I've already been told it's going to be black and white, and it's a normal cat. Fabulous. No, we've had Jack and the Beanstalk with an elephant instead of a cow before, so I have to ask these questions. You never know what's going to happen. 2 years ago we had Aladdin, and they had a panda in it, Kung Fu Panda, like you do in Aladdin. But we sold thousands of these panda toys with big eyes. They were so popular, and that was such a relief to see that go over the plastic. So there is a way around lots of things if you try and find. It might not make us as much money. It didn't make us as much money as the 50p plastic thing you get in and sell for £6. But it's about shifting people's perspective. It's about shifting their ideas of what you're doing. Again, audience, communicating with the audience that no, we don't want to sell this plastic tap. We want to sell something a bit more sustainable. And I strongly feel that you bring that into your marketing of your production, people are going to stand up and listen and want to go to that production. I know that I would, and I don't think just because I'm interested in the environment that that's the only pull. But it's another good thing. People want to see good things, don't they? And if they know that it's a sustainable production, I think that's going to be a selling point.
I think too, like coming back to the supplier thing, I think the more people that we put it out there to, that you get a response. And yes, I think there's absolutely a consumer pressure point with suppliers, but there's also times where just even putting it out there that you're trying to be greener, you get an offer of something. We had a little story. My friend worked at PRG, and I was telling him what we were trying to do, be more sustainable, not have as much waste, and they were about to throw out thousands of Velcro cable ties because they weren't using them. So he brought them down in his car when he came to visit, and so we don't have LX tape on any of our bars anymore. We only have, now, I'm not going to lie, the first Get Out, my Prod LX and crew were like, what? But they're on board with it now, they get it, and that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't just been talking about the fact that we were trying to do this. Question or comment?
I'm not really a question, more of I work for an events company called Set Creative. It happened about early last year, a group of event companies got together and started discussing this kind of point, and they're trying to create an industry standard in events, where what do companies work towards in terms of being sustainable and our impact on the environment, because the events industry is pretty bad for it. So what we then started doing as a company is we created a sustainability handbook that we distributed amongst us as internally, but then to any freelancers who worked with us. So it broke it down to every single department, from lighting, sound, technical build, to food and beverage, to lanyards, things like that. So anyone coming on board to work with us could look at that area. And it wasn't things that you had to do, but it was things to consider. And that was the thing we found the hardest and the most interesting thing, was we cannot change what we're trying to do, full stop. We need to consider and make that change slowly over time, because this won't happen overnight. It will happen over 5, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So what we started looking at was, what can we start considering? What can we start giving as an alternative option? Not saying you can't use that because that does this. But going, you could use that material, but there's also this material that could work just as well, and actually comes from this source, and actually has a life after this. If you want to consider that, this costs this much. And we started looking at things like that. So we created this sustainability handbook that we can share amongst people. But then we also started, and this is where it gets big, and I feel sorry because he talked about intellectual property, now we should share all this information. But we started creating our own database. A database of materials, alternative materials that we could use. And we've been working on that now for about 3-4 months, ranging from alternative timber, alternative plastics, alternative textiles, and then talking to suppliers about what they can get hold of, what's coming out in the market, things like that. So we do a lot of work with Service Graphics, and we said to them, what's coming out in the print market? What's the next new textiles? And they put together a book for us of, these are the things that are coming into the market soon, these are things we're looking to get our hands on, this is PVC free. this is biodegradable, this is recyclable. And that was great, because we started that conversation. And that was something we found that was probably the most interesting thing, was knowledge as well.
Yeah.
We're all going, let's be sustainable, but we have no knowledge of what is out there, and there's thousands upon thousands of companies doing stuff. There's a company in France that makes a plywood MDF equivalent board out of fish waste. And you go, what? Why are you doing that? But actually, the fish waste that's created by the industry is massive. And these guys go around, collect it up, and compress it into a board, which you can use on construction sites and things like that. So we went, brilliant. Well, we've got a job in France coming up. Let's do all the walling and paneling out of fish boards. So we're now in conversation with them about what can we do. It's great. And I think that's where it's, what do we use and what an alternative is. And we've started creating a database like that, which hopefully we'll share one day. We'd like to share. But
Which I think would be great, because I think, you know, yes, these things take time, we've all said that, but I think we're getting to a point where we're running out of time. Like, we don't have 20 years to massively turn this around. So the more that we can kind of, it's hard, because you put resources and you put money and you put time into things, but if we don't start sharing it, if we don't start putting that information out there so everyone can use it, that's what's going to slow, you know, it speeds the process up when we can do that.
It's little wins.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to create something that is recycled, that can fit the practical purpose, you know, the fire rating, the aesthetic, can you print it, can you do all these things with it, can you paint it? And then also, can it then have a life after that?
Yeah.
Trying to get two of those three, and that's really hard.
It's really hard, yeah.
Because the products just don't exist right now, and they're coming out, but slowly. Because we need to be ahead of the game, but it's going to take time. Yeah.
I just think,
Sorry, there's just a couple of questions or comments from online.
Yeah, just got one from Jack here. It says, we often source items locally for touring companies, whether that's technical equipment or small pieces of staging. In Manchester, the arts organisations support each other and often lend things to one another, and he's put a little link on there, so specifically called manchesterclimate.com. Also, Ali, she says, should the big companies in receipt of funding charge a fee to a smaller company with little or no financial funding to reuse production items that are languishing in big warehouses gathering dust? Yeah, so a couple of comments there.
I think we're coming close to end of time on this one.
We are.
But the final comment, yeah.
I guess we're not getting to it with the wrong people in the room to find it out, but we're sort of trying to tell stories for people to come and see, and a lot of this discussions sometimes comes down to spreadsheets and carbon and you know, like what a thing is made out of. But I guess there's also the opportunity for artists to think about what do you need to tell the story much simpler, even though you are in a well-resourced big building where you're used to getting a big chunk of money to build a set. Like, why do you need so much? I don't know. One of the best shows I've done recently, we dropped it on something else. I finished teching and had pressed that, and we just did it the next day. Started teching that, and it just sat on top of another show, and it was absolutely amazing, and it was fantastic show. Even after seeing all the previews, I came and saw it again. Well, how do you think of that? Got to keep going back and seeing the same show. Fanboy. But it was one woman sitting on a chair. That's the extreme. We all do the one woman show and stuff. But I don't know. I just think there's a discussion. There's got to be a discussion somewhere about what do you need? Instead of just about how much does the thing weigh or carbon it produces. It's like is that discussion, I think.
I asked our marketing department the other day about whether they thought, did we have any data that tells us whether our audiences are paying their ticket price for the scenery?
Or the lighting. Controversially,
so I'm not crediting anyone with giving this answer, but they said no. Now, equally, I know lots of people, quite senior people in the industry, that have said to me, don't sacrifice the production values whatever you do, because that's the, USP of the National Theatre. But I think it's a really interesting discussion. I know I'm not. It's weird given what I've done all my working life, but if the story isn't good and the actors don't make me believe them and, for whatever reason, then I'm not really interested in the rest of it. I don't know, what do we think? I worry this all comes down on the designer's own, and that's just not fair. But there is still design, obviously. Even someone sat on a chair in a black box has been designed.
To engage designers that are kind of breaking through, if they get an opportunity at what they consider to be a larger scale theatre, whether that be coming to the Court or the National, whatever, if you give them that opportunity to come to a new place and show what they're about, they're not really going to be interested in doing like a black box chair, are they?
You're absolutely right.
They absolutely want to sell their craft and kind of break the barriers.
Well, at the National, we really celebrate the craft.
Yeah.
We have huge workshops, and we're very proud of the craft, and we don't want those skills to die, so we celebrate them. In fact, we put glass windows around them so the public can see that bit of it, because it's integral to what we do.
Oh yeah, a couple of things I just wanted to talk about. We're currently in discussion with Natural Resources Wales about possibly acquiring some land to start planting trees on it. And I kind of had this vision of like a sort of Swan Lake glade. And the National Theatre Wales 2021, arbour. Yeah, and actually, I mean, yes, it's not, offsetting is a very dubious thing, and it only has any value if it's an ancient woodland. But it is something that we're thinking about and talking. And I don't know if there's a kind of an interest in participating in something like that.
Could you produce the timber to build our scenery with?
In 100 years.
I mean, this is the real debate I'm having with myself. We've banned what used to be called Far Eastern ply at the National. The stuff we've used it less and less over the years anyway, and it was FSC, but in my heart I couldn't justify a tree that's taken over 50 years to mature being chopped down for a 3 or 4 month project. But actually, the birch that we use, you can say the same thing, and the rate of deforestation in the world suggests to me that actually timber isn't quite the sustainable material we've always thought it to be. That's the big debate at the moment, because frankly, most of what we do is timber, steel and canvas. And if you take the timber away, we're in a bit of trouble.
A couple of comments from online.
Not online, I just wanted to throw in a bit here from PMF's side that it sounds obviously like obviously people have got different initiatives and different ideas and different practical steps that they're taking, but that there isn't really a hub for where that information is gathered and where people can share those ideas. Obviously, that's our whole USP, is that we want to share knowledge and ideas, and we have been developing an information page on our website. It's mainly there for signposting to other organisations that are focusing on that work, for example, Judy's Bicycle. But if anybody is developing useful tools to monitor and to measure or to share, feel free to send that to us for us to put it onto the website, so at least we're starting to make one solid central point for everyone to refer to when they kind of ask those questions of their organisations or their projects. So yeah, feel free to message us anytime.
Seems like a lovely place to wrap up. Also, just to put out there that there is also a PMF survey out at the moment.
And one other thing, sorry. The Fringe Theatre in Lagos in Nigeria have asked that if anybody has equipment that they no longer are interested in, and we can arrange a central hub, they would be delighted to take it off our hands, which kind of circularising these things a little bit more. So if anyone's talking about that.
Thank you to all of our panellists, and also thank you all for being here, and really hope that this conversation keeps going, whether it's through PMF or through ABTT or just through all of us coming to see each other's shows and asking questions. So thank you very much. Okay.